So
Yeah.
just a couple of minutes from me, and then I'll hand over to the expert. So firstly, just thank you everyone for joining. This is the latest installment of a series of kind of internal comms webinars we've been hosting at Coolr, and this is about how we can get better at being a part. So I'm really excited today kind of for our guest speaker. So before we get on to that, I just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping. Please do ask as many questions as you want. Please just throw them in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we're going to separate some time at the end. So we'll look to answer all of those. So please just throw as many questions as you can at us. I'm going to give you 1 minute on who Coolr are and our role in this, and then I'm going to kind of hand over and we're going to jump straight into it. So really quickly, we are Coolr. As I said, this is kind of one of many webinars that we've been hosting on internal comms more broadly. We're a digital transformation agency, and we very much are reimagining and using the power of social to transform brands from the inside out. So we are sort of providing internal comms support to a series of clients across the globe, both large and small. We are also the first partner in the EMEA region for Workplace from Facebook as well. So that makes up a part of our offering too. So yeah, we're very excited today to kind of have what's promising to be a very good conversation with Celine. Now Celine, there she is. Hello. Celine is the CEO and founder of We Need Social, which is a engagement, community mobilization, and digital leadership management consultancy. Celine's background, she's got hope she won't mind me saying this, 30 years corporate experience, 17 of which was at Sanofi Pasteur, the French pharmaceutical giant. And it was really during her time there that she started to explore how social networks can really benefit business, and kind of looking into leadership transformation as well. A couple of highlights from Celine that I've kind of picked out. She's a TEDx speaker. She's featured on Microsoft's annual report. She's a contributor and blogger to Forbes. And probably the most interesting sort of highlight that I noticed, according to her LinkedIn, in 2017, Celine was made a Knight of the National Order of Merit by the French government. So I think, to be honest, we're not going to get a better panelist to join us today. So Celine, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Audrey, who's our Director of Operations, and she's going to do some intros and take it from here.
Thanks a lot, Neil.
Yes, so Celine, thank you very much for joining us. It's wonderful to have you, a fellow French woman. You know, it's I think in learning more about what you do and how you do it, I think there's a lot of parallels of what we do at Coolr. So it's lovely to have you with us to discuss some of the key things that we experience in our individual kind of in our individual roles and responsibilities and businesses. So to start off, I wanted to say, so you describe your mission at We Need Social as follows, and I'm quoting now. So segmented and hierarchical, aimed at passive audiences, the common push relational approaches do not deliver as they used to. It's time for engagement leadership. And I, for one, 100% agree. And in fact, at Coolr, we take a very similar, if not the exact same view. Top-down broadcast communications from leaders and managers has a time and a place. But in today's world, it needs to be balanced with bottom-up feedback, the voice of the entire company. And what we like to say at Coolr is that companies don't know where their next brilliant idea is going to come from. It could well be from the executive layer, but in all likelihood, when you tap into the potential of your people, you'll be amazed at what you find and what that delivers back into the business. So, so it's great to speak with you about a little bit about the themes that come out of that. So to start with, can you delve deeper in what you mean by engagement leadership?
Sure. First of all, well, thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. I'm really happy about this opportunity, which is creating more connections, which is enabling us to reflect together about what happens. So this collective sense making is, I think, a big part of what is needed these days. And in companies, I mean, not just because of what happens, just because of COVID. This should actually be a natural behavior in organizations, but too often, and I think we're still relying on old models that have served us in the past. Too often, this sense making, reflecting on what needs to be done, etc., is concentrated in small groups of experts, leaders, etc., and is not extended to a bigger part of like a representation of the whole ecosystem. And too often we go and ask for people's involvement, opinions, etc., at the very last moment, when at the time of implementation or just before implementing those. Now, it is the time we think, oh, by the way, maybe we should involve people, so that because we know about this, the impact of co-creation, those words, empowerment, participation, etc., they're all like floating around. We are, I think, accustomed now. They populate articles, webinars, etc. So leaders know about that, but in practice, they remember about these words and the associated behaviors when it's too late already, because people have not been in a position to be co-authors of decisions, and that is a big difference. So, but before I go deeper into those themes, I'd like to remind everybody here that this awareness was born, in my case, from practice, from the field. I was I have been in corporates, in organizations, many years, and I have not always been aware of those dynamics. It is only progressively that I became I started to see systems, but quite late actually in my professional life, and that's a pity. I regret I haven't been able to see that earlier, and I hope that what you are doing and what we're doing together is helping young generations to see the impact of systems earlier in their professional lives, and to seek ways to influence systems rather than wake up a little bit too late. I mean, it's never too late, really, because when you sort of realize that later in your career, then you can build on all the experience that you've accumulated in a way. So that's not bad. But so that's another thing. Creating, going with the flow, doing your work as best as possible, being a good corporate citizen, etc. It's important for one's own development, for collective performance, but it's far from being enough. We need more than that. We need to see systems. So a thinker I often refer to those days, named Barry Oshry, from the UK, spoke a lot about system sight versus system blindness. And I think that's very important because everything is systemic, and we realize this now in this situation. Everything is connected. Everything has a consequence on other things that we do not necessarily perceive. We are all connected, and one of the problems created by this pandemic is that it affects the quality of our interactions, of our connections. So, so seeing systems and realizing that, and taking like a system view on problems rather than jumping to, you know, solutions without being aware of potential consequences, is important.
Yeah.
One of the thought leaders I also quote often, Myron Rogers, told me once that one thing is sure, there's only one thing that is sure in complexity, in complex systems, is that there will be unintended consequences. So that's the only thing that's sure, that we can be sure of. The rest is uncertain. So what do we do in this uncertainty? Now, going back to your question, how can we define engagement leadership a bit better? In my corporate life, when I started to see those systemic forces that were shaping our experience as workers in companies, as leaders, and when I thought to myself, maybe we could do something about those systemic forces, what happened is that I created, like, really by chance. I mean, it hadn't occurred to me that it would happen this way, but I sort of triggered a movement, a corporate movement of men and women joining forces voluntarily, using the digital network, the social network in the company, to as a means to connect faster and wider across geographies. And so this movement made me realize the power of the power of the value and the power of agency, the power of action that is untapped. Usually, this power comes from not being told. It comes from
Volunteering.
volunteering, wanting something, you know, desiring to contribute, desiring to join force, to doing good together is an extremely strong human driver, I feel. And too often companies ignore that force. It's like a giant pool of energy in which they're not tapping because they are not great at seeing it and at creating it, at triggering this, because they always want to, you know, organizations are shaped like there's like all those mental handcuffs. And when I speak about organizations, I speak about us. Organizations is not like something like abstract that exists without us. So we always tend to reproduce, you know, segmentation, control, defining clearly what is done here and what is done there, you know, territories, etc. And so we tend to, even when we perceive there's something here that might be, if we could create this engagement, this mobilization, etc., sooner or later we tend to how can I switch this off in a way by imposing traditional corporate recipes.
Well, I think it's because there's comfort in that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's not only socially acceptable up till a point. Obviously, there are, you know, drivers of change today that are making that less and less acceptable in a way, and certainly the younger generations are pushing for that because they expect a different they expect different things from their businesses, from the companies that they work for. But yeah, I think there's comfort in that, and so you kind of just naturally, it's a human thing, right? You just kind of go back to your comfort zone because there's less risk involved in putting yourself out there and instilling, kind of empowering your people to have that voice. It's not that they don't have a voice, it's just being willing as a leader, as a leader and a manager, to be willing to listen to it and action things off the back of that. And I think it is really difficult. It's a lot easier said than done. But yeah, and we work with a lot of companies in various ways with their leaders to make them more comfortable with the way that they present themselves. And a lot of the times, you know, some companies that we work with are going through a pivotal change, whether it be a change in leadership and so forth. And so the new leader within the business is trying to kind of instill his or her kind of mark in their first 100 days or in their first kind of few days within the business. What is their mission? What are they trying to accomplish? And that's the kind of, that's the one of the points in time where we really want to leverage the kind of the message that we try to land with that population, with those executives, is that that's the time to really set the tone for how you wish to drive the business forward and lead, and having that open conversation on a regular basis in the way that you feel most comfortable. It can take various forms, but encouraging that and putting themselves out there, they will get so much back from it. Yes, there's risk. Yes, it's outside of the comfort zone, but they will get so much more out of it. And so yeah, it's a constant battle, I would say. And we're in the midst of change, but that change needs to happen very quickly. Otherwise, companies are going to become obsolete, and they won't be able to attract the talent and the people that they want and that they need in order to drive the business forward, because those people won't want to join an archaic way of working.
That's true. But think of all the forces that still push against this message and that those leaders are subject to. Absolutely. For example, performance management systems have still not evolved, and they still reward individual performance rather than collective performance. There's this pyramid-shaped organization in companies where you have fewer people at the top, and so if you aspire to create more impact, to access those higher ranks, well, then you have to be better, shinier than your colleagues, right? So it doesn't favor collaboration. It doesn't favor enablement of people reporting to you. It favors more attention to what your boss wants. So it's a very contradictory message that is being sent to leaders these days. They're torn between maybe what they would like to do, maybe seeing like power is a powerful drug, as we know. Once you've been exposed to power, to having the ability to decide fast, to create your freedom around your own actions, to being less constrained by the system. Well, you don't want to be more constrained. We get accustomed to that, and we don't want to relinquishing power is very difficult. Advantages, etc. It's very, very hard. So we need to create some other, motivation for people to, and one that is not just based on values, on personal values, but on proof points of economic efficiency. That this and it's hard, frankly, because even if you see in in politics, for example, this although populism seems to go down a little bit, but we can't be sure of that. But this heroic leadership style is still very much in favor, in many, many places of the world, in the economy as well. So it's hard. And there's a transition that we need to operate. I hope the young generations, the younger generations, but also all of us in positions of impact. I hope a more diverse workforce will push for that. I also think that these times of crisis that we are living, that we're going through, are actually a fantastic opportunity for freedom, and a fantastic opportunity to create new rules, to break free of existing rules. When everything goes right, we there's no reason to, or no reason that appears valid to people higher up to do things different. But now there is. So can't we create something else? And
it's I mean, I completely agree with what you've just said, and I think with the pandemic and with the kind of shift to work from home for a lot of people who are, you know, free to do that, there's even more of an onus on leaders to make sure that they communicate and reach their audiences, their people, in the right way, in a way that it brings them along, as opposed to just kind of more broadcast and telling versus you know, as to use your term, kind of co-creating in the process and bringing people along. So I guess one of my what I'd like to move on to next is, with that backdrop, is I'd like to pose you the question of how, given today's post-pandemic or during pandemic world, how can we make sure that we create the human contact that we lack when we are apart in the way we are, when we're working in such structures that for many people are quite foreign to them. So it's a big kind of it's a big change from a personal and professional point of view and an individual level. But how can we create those communities and that kind of human way of working that comes a bit more naturally when we have a shared space, an office? How can we create those connections? What's your view on that?
And I like the way you asked the question, you know, being better at being apart. I thought that was a very nice way to phrase this very existential, you know, question that we all have these days. I think this crisis made us realize, maybe even further, deeper than what we thought, that humans are social beings. We don't exist just, you know, for ourselves or for our closed ones, our families. We are social beings. Even work is a social act. There's no such thing as my work that I can do in full independence. I think we have this crisis has made this extremely obvious. You know, work is a social act, and even leadership is relational. Leadership is not just a title, is not just a job, a role, a function. Leadership is a relationship. So, and everything is a relationship, really. Gregory Bateson used to say there's no such thing as a hard table. There's a reaction between the table, this material, and your finger, right? Which makes you say this table is hard. But if we only see things, we only see like defined things, you know, we only see one part of a relationship. So back to my the main point, which is answering your question about relationships. I think there's two things. A relationship starts with one end of the relationship. So I would say it starts with oneself, and then there's the other end of the relationship. So we need to tend to both. And I would say start with yourself, right? Not in a selfish way, but in a very generous way, and generous to yourself as well. You know, we need to be gentle to ourselves. You know, it's okay if we wake up a little bit late. It's okay if we waste time to care for families or leisure time, or it's okay if we put on a little bit weight because we don't exercise that often. It's okay. You know, there are things that are much more problematic than that. So relationship to self, I would say, be gentle and keep growing. Keep growing is the other side of that piece of advice, if I may, because who am I to give advice to anyone? At least this is an advice that I'm giving to myself, and that might be useful to others. So be gentle, keep growing. How? And keep growing to me is cultivating our capacity to explore, cultivating our capacity for agency. Because the problem is in this crisis is that we often feel powerless. And powerlessness is probably the worst kind of feeling. If you have powerless employees, workers in your organization, or people who feel powerless, they will not take initiatives, they will not deliver at their best, they will not be creative, they will just apply rules, so everything will, all the weight of strategy setting, of pushing, instructions, of controlling if the job is done, everything is like concentrated. We talked about this in the beginning, concentrated on the shoulders of very few number of people who are already overworked and burned by this crisis. So you don't want that. You want to instill a sense of agency in everyone, and it starts with yourself. So agency, what is it? It's the capacity for action. And I read somewhere that I found something I found interesting about agency. There's three elements in agency. One is the ability to act, so that's knowledge. The second thing is the capacity to act. That's the network, the support network you have around, the resources, and then there's the willingness to act. And organizations, I find, are most often focused on the ability to act there, so through training, those kind of things, but they're not very good at the other two. And I read this morning a blog post by Peter van der Overaa, who's a remarkable thinker, and he spoke about agency in his post today, and clarified it as a sense. He said agency can be perceived as a sense of direction and choice, and I really like that. So exploration, cultivating our sense of agency. That means cultivating our knowledge, exploring things, but also cultivating our network, our support network, cultivating our willingness to act. So paying attention to where we think we might be helpful, what resonates with us, what makes our heart beat a little bit faster, those things. And maybe to summarize this, that would be, or at least in the way we present that to others, it's the quality of presence. Mm-hmm. How do we cultivate this quality of presence? How are we meaningfully present to others? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing, the first part of what I thought about in response to your question, the relationship to self. And now there's the relationship to others. And here I feel it is really, at least for me, what is most important is to create capacity in the system, create an environment, or contribute to an environment that is in action, that is also not feeling powerless, mm-hmm. that is feeling, that is nurturing its capacity for action. So how do we do that? I think it's important to create peace in the network rather than fueling, more distress, more, social networks, external social networks, and their algorithms in particular, which are under heavy scrutiny these days, work on extreme emotions, in particular, anger and moral disgust. Okay. And I see myself reacting to some of the tweets, or some of the articles I see with anger and emotional disgust. But I know that's a trigger, and now that I'm aware of that, and I encourage everyone to watch the Social Dilemma movie if they haven't done it yet. But I force myself not to respond, not to share those emotions, because I don't want to fuel the system with more disgust, anger, etc. It's just it's really counterproductive mm-hmm. to our world today. So creating peace, empathy is not just being, it is actually not being in agreement with everybody else, but it's trying to see the world through their eyes, trying to think about their situation, creating responsibility in the system also. And that's particularly relevant for people, for leaders, for people sitting at the top of organizations, because naturally, and that's something that Barry Oshry explained in his system site theory, is that naturally, when you're sitting somewhere in a system, whether you're sitting at the top, in the middle, or at the bottom, you tend to adopt, reflects behaviors. It's not just because you are who you are, it's because where you stand in a system. And we all stand at the top, in the middle, or at the bottom of some systems. We can sit simultaneously at the top or at the bottom of different systems. But by reflex, people at the top will suck up responsibility. And by reflex, people at the bottom of the system will wait for instructions. And what we need to do is those counterintuitive behaviors where leaders, for example, ask people who report to them, what can I do to help you? Which is a very unusual question for a leader.
It opens up the discussion.
Completely. But it means that this leader must be okay with the possibility of changing their own mind about what should be done, etc. Because
what's next?
The capacity you create in others has way more value than the expected value of your own idea. Right?
It's difficult to come to that conclusion, but yes, that seemingly simple question does come to the core of it, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And it has so much meaning to the person who's receiving it as well, because that, to me, if I were at the receiving end of that question, means that my ideas, my thoughts, my creativity is valued, and that I can contribute I'm almost given license to contribute, even if I could before and I might not have actioned it. This kind of incites the action and motivates people to kind of step up in a way that we need them to, and that they should in some way, shape, or form. So, I mean, in terms of kind of concrete ways in which businesses can embody what you've just described, and essentially empowering people to come about, thinking about how they can individually contribute to the relationship with the business and with others, whether it be one relationship or one to many. And then on the other side of the relationship, looking at how you can open up the freedoms and really kind of have that two-way discussion. What concretely are a few things that businesses can do? Maybe there are processes that they can put in place, or ideas, or a culture set. Is it a number of different things? Is it a combination of these? What do you think are kind of some of the levers that are perhaps maybe the low-hanging fruit, some of the easier levers to pull in order to drive, in some cases, the first step in that direction?
Yes. So I may surprise you, because I often say that it's really not about tools, it's about culture and so on. But I will start with tools, actually, because that's really the low-hanging fruit. But it's been there for 10 years already. Like, set up, like leverage your internal social network. Like, for God's sake, it's been here all this time, and leaders have not been on those social networks, or very rarely, or they've used them as like transmission channels, which they are not. Absolutely not. A social conversation in a company transforms leadership. It creates relationships between people. It favors personal connections and recognition of each other as humans. This is a super easy way to nurture a sense of community in a company. So and I remember like banging my head on the wall in my former company when the head of internal communication told me, asked me how I had access to such information. I said, well, it was here, it was on Yammer. And then she said, oh, but I have no time to read that. It was her job. You know, she was the head of internal communication. Why on earth could she think that it was not her job to be and not in her duties to be not just reading the conversations but contributing, participating in the conversations, you know? That's so then you can imagine a lot of different processes change and so on, but the most interesting to me is that teams do that together and find ways that work for them. But it's the process of reflecting together around adaptation, evolution, what should we do, what works for us, what it's the process, it's this conversation and this co-creation process that really creates value, authorship, as we said in the beginning, right? So that would be my two recommendations. Use this Dan internal social network really, and use it not just for, you know, fun stuff, or use it for work. They are made for work, those things, you know. And I keep coming up with this example of I mean those few examples I have implemented in my previous life, but and the latest of which was focused on quality. So quality improvement was actually possible for the first time in 20 years because we stopped solutioneering. And instead, we focused on nurturing a community of people who care for one another. And it made a whole lot of difference.
Yeah.
It was night and day, actually. When we stopped focusing on solutions and focused on the people and their capacity to create together solutions, that we finally found the key. That was the key, you know. And so the network and the process of creating solutions that work for them.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to repeat what you've just said, but I completely agree. I mean, we do that through our partnership with Facebook on their workplace product. But we also work with a number of companies that are non-workplace and that are looking to leverage the internal tools and processes that they have to better reach their people and do exactly what you've just said, which is to leverage the collective mind, to co-create, to encourage a culture of inclusion, of well-being, and that once you get that right, and that culture piece, which is very difficult to create in the right way, and every company is going to have a slightly different approach and a slightly different fit, but once you get that, then you can really kind of drive the right conversations and really start to have that two-way conversation that we were talking about earlier. I'm just conscious of time. So I've just noticed one of the questions coming in, and actually it's a good segue into what I wanted to discuss next, which is mental health in the workplace. And this is kind of the second and final theme that we'll be addressing before we open up for questions. Celine, you worked with the police force in the UK. Can you speak to your work with them and in the capacity of mental health, and what that means for, you know, what were some of the conclusions that you drew from that experience, and how can that be applied to some of the people on this call and just more broadly to businesses in general?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The UK police is doing some remarkable work around suicide prevention and indeed mental health. And it's particularly difficult in that organization, that kind of organization, because of the culture. The very culture of the organization prevents dialogue, openness around mental health issues, right? Because it's a culture where you're supposed to be strong and, and sometimes you have access to weapons. And so it's very complicated. And everything that, I mean, they realized the limits, the lack of efficiency of traditional communication approaches to that problem. Things that come from the top, training sessions, e-learnings, brochures, those kind of things, they may be very good. They may be very good, but they still come from that top. And they still haven't, there's not this authorship we talked about. There's no there is a lack of a sense of it doesn't create agency in people. It still treats people as an audience for that kind of communication material. And what they wanted was precisely to develop that agency where people feel empowered to not only to speak up, which was like already a very important goal, but also to help one another. So developing this peer-to-peer support culture. And so what they've decided was to create a community around that, or to you never really create a community. You create the conditions for a community to exist and to flourish. And they've been doing that for a while already. We started talking together about 6 years ago, and they launched their community in 2017. It's called Oscar Kilo, for okay. You can find them on Twitter, you can find them on LinkedIn. They insisted with the hierarchy, which I suppose was not very easy, to have a public and open dialogue about these topics, which was quite a bold challenge, I would say, exposing which something that might be perceived as a weakness. But in fact, it's this exposing which creates goodwill and acceptance, and which is ultimately what they are trying to do with society in general. So taking a bigger look at their goal, and they created that community on using social media, public social media, developing as much as possible a peer-to-peer network, so supporting people to expand their knowledge around what is it to support colleagues, what do we do in that or that situation. So you see, they stopped solutioneering and instead supported the development of a community, which is much more. It may seem as a step back. It may seem like solutioneering is a shortcut to solutions. It goes faster. Oh, let's create, whatever, a training. But it's wasted time and wasted money, really. So instead of that, yes, it takes more time, but the results are way more intense and sustainable, because you have created capacity in the system, in each and everybody, each and every person. Very, very different. The system is more resilient that way. So yes, they've been very successful since then. They've achieved a lot, and they're doing like a lot of things, webinars. They're growing internationally. I would love to bring their practice to the French police, but our culture is like so much different, very, very different. So there are things that really, and that's the beauty of complexity. Everything is contextual. You need to take the context into consideration. There's no one size fit all answer.
Well, I think I'd love to see that in the US police.
Yeah,
without going into that too much, but yeah, same thing. I mean, every system has its own kind of particularities in it. But I love your point about peer-to-peer and how we can create those moments for kind of helping each other out and allowing for kind of a broader conversation. You don't necessarily know perhaps where it's going or what what the purpose is, but allowing people to kind of just open up and have that space and that opportunity, if they wish to address things that are important to them. We do that by creating communities and allowing and giving the people the space that they can then run with to talk about parenting in the times of COVID, you know, or you know, mental health, obviously, you know, well-being, and that can be, you know, physical well-being all the way through to mental health well-being, you know, and just talking about food, pets, and these types of things that are essentially bringing your authentic self to work. Because when you do that and open yourself up, and have the space, even if you are not a contributor, but at least are understanding of that you might not be the only one in the same situation, in the situation that you're in, then that allows people to kind of bring themselves forward and allows for that creativity and that authenticity to come out. And you can only benefit from that. And I think more and more, I'd like to say that more and more the companies that certainly we work with and that we speak to are finding that that is absolutely paramount in their approach to internal comms, but just in their approach to people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's the human kind of approach.
Yes.
And so I do think I'm cautiously optimistic that this will continue, and that, you know, businesses have now, in light of the pandemic, it was already there before, but the pandemic has kind of brought it to the fore, that is very important to allow people that space to discuss things that are perhaps adjacent or perhaps not at all related to work as such, but that has the positive repercussions into the workspace that we need.
So yes, and I would add a point of caution. I think it's great and it's super interesting, and we need that. But we need to also be very careful in a time of exhaustion. We don't want to add this another burden on people, that is to expose their private lives, their private interests, etc. And that, I mean, some people love to do that and it's fine. Some people find comfort in doing that and it's fine. Other people find it oppressive.
Yeah.
And we need to respect that. And we need to be careful that this does not become a norm against which people are judged, right? And I would rather have like a little bit of that, yes, but I would rather have, because the danger is that, I mean, an additional danger I see is that conversations around, you know, hobbies, whatever, will happen, but then the work processes will remain unchanged, and then companies will feel like, oh, okay, you know, job is done, we've opened a community for pet owners, you know. And no, that's not the point. The point is to do the job in a way that is more conducive of human to human relationships. But the work itself, you know, how do we do sales? How do we do research? How do we do quality, whatever, in a way that enables people to see each other across hierarchical differences, levels, across geographies, across cultures, etc. How do we treat each other with respect? How are we open to each other's contributions, rather than treating 90% of a workforce as an obedient, you know, army? Yeah, that's not what we want.
No, it isn't. That's a great caveat. Absolutely. Well, listen, we've got a few minutes left. It's been great speaking to you, Celine. I wanted to open up to those on the call in case you have any questions for Celine or myself. And if not, then we will bid you all farewell. But I'll give you a minute or so to type any burning questions that you might have for us.
And I'll say a hello to the name I recognize here, Paulina. Hi, Paulina. Good to see you here. Hello.
Right. I think we might just close it out then. Celine, it's
Oh,
been.
there's one question coming. I see.
Would you have any advice for creating a community when the employees work for different teams or companies, for example, in a co-working space? That is an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I would say the first goal shouldn't be a community, because the community is just a tool to achieve what? Things should start, the aggregation of energies, the integration of energies should be done by people who want to do something about something. So what is that something? And how do you recognize people who have this energy? Who I think a community is never started by a single individual, or it should not, because it does not bear the seeds of diversity. So it should always start with a few individuals wanting to do something together, and finding that, and opening up to others, and inviting others to join if they want. Again, a community is not made of people who are voluntold, people assigned to community. It doesn't work. But yeah, to answer this question precisely, I would say, how do you have deep conversations about what matters? And I think everything starts with that, and then you'll find the way, and then it might become a community, it might become something else, but it's the purpose and doing something about it that really matters. So you need to make it possible for people to share that purpose with you, and you to share that purpose with them. If you just speak about the weather, or you won't have those deep conversations. So asking good questions, thoughtful questions, being open to answering thoughtful questions as well, creating maybe a little bit of time, preserved from urgencies or other work, to have those moments of conversations is precious, really important.
Yeah, I think I entirely agree with what you said. I think giving the opportunity for people to contribute, to have that opportunity to create the community without forcing them to have that conversation, if you see what I mean, but giving them the theme, or allowing them to voice something that they wish to share, and then from there you can create kind of the culture building conversations that stem out from that, and facilitate it, really kind of support it in the way you see fit. We've got a few more questions here, so we'll jump to so Adam has asked, is culture the sole responsibility of the CEO/C-suite, or should it also come from the bottom up? I think answer to this question, but
culture is an emerging phenomenon born from a multiplicity of conversations over time. So if those conversations are high quality conversations, if they are diverse, if they contribute to something that people believe in, then culture will be of high quality and welcoming, and etc., and generating profits, because that's what we want as well. So I would say it is both. It is the responsibility of leaders. It does not happen without leaders involvement, for sure. But it's not dependent on leaders alone.
No.
It's a little bit too easy to wait for leaders, for those leaders to create a culture. Very often, especially in large organizations, they don't have this power. They have a power, but they don't have the power to change the culture. It starts with all of us. What do we do? And we always have a space for action. So what do we any of us, what do we do about culture, about the quality of our interactions?
Yeah, I think to kind of echo what you were saying about, I think the leadership, C-suite, whatever we want to call it, the executive layer of any company, I think needs to set the tone. And as we were saying, to tie it back to what we were saying before, give that shared space, allow the opportunity for conversation, set the kind of what the expectations or the general themes of where you're going, the values of the company and the business that you wish people to embody, and then allow people to give them the chance to show you what they can do with that framework. I think that balance is paramount. It can't only come from the top, can't only come from the bottom. I think there needs to be a little bit of direction, a little bit of framework, but as you were saying, I think after that, once you set that tone, I think.
And it's not just words, it's actions and how you deliver, how you enable action in the company. If you like go in a very like push directional, instruction kind of way, even if you proclaim a culture of collaboration, blah, 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 people will see the difference. They will see the discrepancy. It's very obvious. The only ones who don't see the discrepancy are the originators of those communication materials or proclamations. So the way we get to the future is the future we get. If we get it to the future in a collaborative, co-creative way, the future will look like that. If we don't, our claims will remain baseless.
Exactly. Well, listen, we've got some great questions that have come through, including one on emotional intelligence that I would have loved to delve into, but unfortunately we're out of time. So and I'm conscious that we don't want to run over. So Celine, thank you very, very much for what I personally have found a riveting discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Audrey.
Thank you to everyone who is on the call for your questions as well. If you want to know anything more about Celine or about Coolr, then feel free to reach out to us. So Celine, you are at weneedsocial.com.
Yes.
Is your website.
Yes.
You can find us on wearecoolr.com, and of course, we will be reaching out to each and every one of you just to follow up, and in case you have any additional questions, and we can liaise from there. But thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely Wednesday, and a lovely end to the week as well. Take care, everyone.
Bye.